that you take a couple home, okay? This is one of the handouts we've got. I want you to take a couple because I want you to pass it out to people. It's a letter by the international physicians that Linda referred to, the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, that Linda referred to. It's a letter that was published in 140 medical journals simultaneously several months ago across the world. Absolutely unprecedented event. Medical journals don't publish what some other medical journal publishes. They don't have any of it. They all publish the same editorial. It's never happened before. Probably will never happen again. That's how alarmed the medical community is. The responsible medical community who study this issue, that's how alarmed they are. That they got 140 medical journals to publish the same editorial calling for vigorous effort to eliminate nuclear weapons. And the whole editorial is in this handout, and I commend it to you, and I hope you'll distribute it. You want to take an extra copy and give it to your doctor and say, do you know about this? I wish you would. Now, let's see, I'm not sure what's going to happen here. Ah, good, okay. So the direct impacts are the ones you kind of expected. Blast, fire, tremendous force, radiation. But then the after effects are the ones that we didn't know about until the late 80s, and we really learned only conclusively in the last 15 years. These come from the atmospheric studies that we couldn't do in the beginning of the nuclear age, we couldn't do in the mid-80s, but we now can do. They're the same atmospheric studies that have predicted for years the onset of global climate change. Same methodology has shown that the fires from an extensive nuclear war will go up in the atmosphere, circle the Earth. If it's US and Russia with hundreds of cities on fire and that much smoke, brings the Earth's temperatures down to ice age temperatures for like 10 years. Nothing can grow, and most of the world starves. The lucky people get away with just being obliterated in the explosions. Now, this sounds fantastic, but I put it that way because it's for the dramatic effect. The lucky people die in the explosions in the immediate fires. Over the next 2 years, 5 billion people in the world will starve to death in a war between the United States and Russia. And understand what's going on. You saw out there that there are 5,000 nuclear weapons held by both sides. But we're only talking about the United States and Russia using somewhere in the order of 1,000 nuclear weapons in that war that we just described. The United States and Russia, we sit here right now, the United States and Russia have over 1,000 missiles each with multiple nuclear warheads pointed at one another and ready to launch in an instant's notice. Ready to launch. That's a system that's under the control of man, but we can't be sure. It's a complex system. There could be accidents. There could be a rogue in the system that causes somebody to be wrong. It could be attacked, perhaps, by internet hackers. Of course, the military is trying to do everything to prevent all of that sort of stuff, but no such complex system is foolproof. No such complex system is fail-safe in all cases. And the results are devastating. So even if Vladimir Putin doesn't push the button, or Joe Biden doesn't push the button, or any of the other world leaders who have similar kinds of, or other kinds of nuclear forces, it's possible the system could go off accidentally. So that's the US and Russia. But I want you to get this point. If India and Pakistan, who have only a couple hundred nuclear weapons each, attack one another, and they are at war with one another along their borders and constantly at one another's throats, and they each have their nuclear weapons to try to protect themselves from the other ones, which is why that's the justification that's given by most countries for having nuclear weapons. We're protecting ourselves from the bad guys who have nuclear weapons. Well, you're not. You're putting the whole world in danger. But if India and Pakistan go to war with a couple hundred nuclear weapons each, 2 billion people on Earth starve to death. 130 million of them in the United States. How could this be? A war between India and Pakistan, halfway around the world, and 130 million Americans die? Well, it won't happen right away. It happens from starvation. There will be such an extent of global starvation, there will not be enough food. A whole lot of America will lose its ability to grow food, even from an India-Pakistan war. But not all of it. But there will be such a shortage of food in the world that Americans will starve. Estimate is 130 million. So here's what I consider to be the plain fact. Nuclear weapons are the most murderous weapons that man has ever conceived. They're often called weapons of mass destruction. I think that's a euphemism. They're not just about destruction. In fact, that's not what we did in Japan. What terrified Japan into surrendering was we kill 100,000 people in 2 fell swoops. And they thought we had more. Fortunately, they didn't know better. And so they surrendered. We terrified Japan into surrendering. Now, they deserved it, of course, but they deserved to be stopped. But did they deserve to have 200,000 people die? Again, I don't think it's useful to debate that. We need to face today's situation. But they are weapons of mass murder and mass terror, in my view. And I don't like the euphemism, weapons of mass destruction. It turns your head away from what's really going on. In other words, we've put, in an effort to defend ourselves, by amassing more power to overcome the bad guy with lots of power, we've put the whole of humanity at risk. That brings us to the moral questions. Is it acceptable to put the whole of humanity at risk? Well, I bet there's nobody in this room that thinks that it is, but some of you may be thinking it's unavoidable. It's not unavoidable. But we're not doing what we need to do to avoid it. It's not unavoidable. This is the part of the website of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, and some of the color and so on. It's an excellent website. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, while not on the forefront of this struggle to eliminate nuclear weapons, has some very good stuff on their website, and I commend it to you. Just go to the usccb.org and type in nuclear weapons, and you'll see what they've got. All kinds of statements, position papers, a whole curriculum about nuclear weapons, etc. They've done a good job. Unfortunately, the word's not getting out. You don't hear it from the pulpit. So one of the things I want you to do is go back to your parish priest and say, how come you're not telling us that Pope Francis has labeled these weapons immoral and that they are a threat to humanity, and you're not telling us even what the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops are telling us? Put up. This is Pope Francis's statement when he went to Hiroshima and Nagasaki back in 4 years ago. And this is where he first labeled nuclear weapons immoral, and even immoral to possess. Well, okay, maybe immoral to use, but why immoral to possess? That's a question I want to ask you. Why do you think Pope Francis, excuse me, I grew up in that era of Pope St. John, okay, the 23rd. He's still very much on my mind. Why do you think Pope Francis has gone this far as to label them immoral? Jane, real loud, please.
The amount of money we spend on them is just taken from the pockets of the poor.
Very good. Very, very important point. The United States spends about $80 billion a year on its nuclear arsenal. Not just on the warheads or the bombs, but on the missiles, the airplanes, all the forces that it takes, the whole works, $80 billion a year. In round numbers. We don't actually know the whole extent of it, because there's a black budget that the federal government has that you can't find out about, that's so top secret that only key people in Congress know what it is and the rest of us do not. So there's probably more. The United States has embarked on a $1.7 billion program to modernize its nuclear arsenal. $1.7 billion. Just imagine what that could do if put to humanitarian purposes, to the battle against climate change, to any other more deserving cause. And globally, all of the nations that have nuclear weapons are now modernizing, and this is why it's getting worse and worse and worse. They're all modernizing their nuclear arsenal. Because their conventional wisdom is the way to beat the enemy is to be stronger than the enemy. But it's conventional wisdom that just doesn't apply in this case. It applies in smaller scale kinds of things, when you're shooting at one another, maybe lobbing artillery shells, maybe even using aircraft. But not in this case. In my view, it's immoral to put the whole world at risk to try to protect yourself. It just is. So what do you do about it? Well, let me look at a couple other things. That's Pope Francis. This is the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. They're not quite as bold as he is, but you notice they call for ultimately to abolish these weapons entirely. We're not hearing about that in the pulpit. This is, if Pope Francis is my number one hero, and he is, then this is my number two hero, Bishop John Wester. Archbishop Wester is the Archbishop of Santa Fe, New Mexico, which encompasses virtually all of New Mexico. He has more nuclear weapons in his archdiocese than any other archbishop in the world. Because Kirtland Air Force Base in his archdiocese is the repository for about 3,000 of those 5,000 plus nuclear weapons. Those are the ones that we do not have ready, but we got them in reserve. Why do we have them in reserve, you might ask? Well, okay, we won't get into that. But anyway, he's got the most nuclear weapons of any archdiocese. He's also got 2 of the U.S.'s 3 nuclear weapons laboratories. Los Alamos, where the atomic bomb was generated, was developed, and which is doing more and more work, where the H-bomb was developed. So, Sandia Laboratories, which is designing the weapons and building them, building the warheads, excuse me. So those 2, there's only one other nuclear weapons laboratory in the United States, but Archbishop Wester has 2 of them. So he became alerted to this issue, a number of things, but included a visit some time ago to Hiroshima. And so last year, in January, he issued a pastoral letter. Now, you know, we're used to bishops issuing pastoral letters, and we kind of go, oh. Well, this is a pastoral letter like never been issued before. It's thoroughly researched. It's 53 pages long, with footnotes, with supplementary material, and it covers just about every aspect of nuclear weapons that you could think of. It's got the technology, it's got the history, it's got the humanitarian impact, it's got the moral impact. And Archbishop Wester's conclusion, and this is why he's my number 2 hero in the world, is that we have to do something about this, and we need to start a conversation. That's his very gentle way of putting this. He's a very, very approachable, non-ostentatious kind of person. He's a very unusual archbishop, personally. And his phrase for this is we need to start a conversation that will lead us to the elimination of nuclear weapons. His pastoral letter, this is not the way he issued it, okay? It was just 50 pages. The Pax Christi USA said this is priceless. And they published it this way. So it's got a nice cover, it's good paper, very, very readable. If I had had this when I was embarking on my quest to learn more about nuclear weapons and what we should do about it, I could have saved myself at least 2 years, if not more, of learning. It's a very, very educational document. It's very readable, and it really commands authority. Take at least one. If you care to, take more and give them to somebody and say, look at this. You don't have to read the whole thing. Just start somewhere. You probably will end up reading the whole thing. I wish he was here. I've been successful in sponsoring him, arranging for him to speak at 3 symposia in Massachusetts, all by video. He's a wonderful man, very gracious. I finally have an invitation to go meet him, and so next Tuesday, in fact, I will be in Albuquerque meeting with Archbishop Wester, finally, face to face. Something I've been wanting to do for a year and a half. I'm very, very privileged. And then I'm going to meet with some of the people who helped him write this, because he had a lot of good assistance. Well, your bishop and my bishop, Cardinal Sean, need that kind of help so they can comprehend the issue, so they can get up and do what he's done. Now, Archbishop Wester has joined with the Archbishop of Seattle. Together, they made a pilgrimage to Hiroshima and Nagasaki this year and formed a pact or a project with the Archbishop of Nagasaki and the Bishop of Hiroshima. And I'm going to find out, I hope, a lot about what they want to do with that project, because I'm determined, and as are a lot of other people in Pax Christi, Massachusetts, to try to do everything we can in Massachusetts to support what those 2 archbishops want to do to eliminate nuclear weapons. More, he calls this, his pastoral letter is living in the light of Christ's peace. The gospel message is a lot of stuff about nonviolence that gets overlooked, and he's honing in on that. I'm going to skip this stuff. Okay, so here's the situation today. 9 nuclear nations modernizing their nuclear weapons arsenals to make them more deadly, more easy to use, etc. Several other nations saying quite openly, maybe we should have nuclear weapons too. Japan, South Korea in particular. We have treaties, I've mentioned them, okay. Unfortunately, the treaty between the United States and Russia will run out in 2 years. It has to be renewed. That depends very much on who's in charge of those 2 countries, because they can renew it themselves. President Biden came in, and he had 4 days to renew this treaty between the United States and Russia. And he did, because at that point Vladimir Putin had already said repeatedly he wanted to renew it, and unfortunately Donald Trump said, "Nah, I can do better." So Joe Biden renewed it, but it's coming up again. The UN approved about 5 years ago a wonderful treaty called the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. 69 nations have now ratified that treaty, in which they subscribe to having nothing to do with nuclear weapons. You can't do any research in those countries, you can't manufacture anything that has to do with nuclear weapons, all of that sort of stuff. But they're all non-nuclear nations. None of the nuclear nations have signed on to this treaty, and none of them intend to. They won't even send observers to the periodic meeting of the nations who have signed the treaty. So some of us are after the United States. Please send an observer to this meeting, which comes up the end of November in New York City at the UN. So what do we do about this threat? Well, strengthen our force. That's the conventional wisdom. Okay, so bad guys are really going to take it in the chin. Wrong solution. Might work some places. It's just a disaster for the world if we do that. The only way out that anybody that I have any credence in can come up with is to do better on the treaty situation, to get the 9 nations together to agree on a way that they will collaterally eliminate their nuclear weapons. Now, then we come to the question that this gentleman was very wise to ask. Well, how do you know they're going to agree to their treaty? You have to have inspection. You have to have intrusive inspection. And it has to be enforced. There are going to have to be some penalties. Hopefully not military destruction if somebody violates the treaty, but it has to be inspected. There have to be intrusive inspections. Do we know how to do that? Well, I described what the United States and Russia do. Okay, but we have worked out, in the Iran nuclear agreement, we worked out far more intrusive inspection routines that were actually done by an independent third party, the UN, International Atomic Energy Administration, who certified for a year and a half that Iran was living up to its treaty obligations and was not progressing towards creating a nuclear weapon. They don't have one yet. And then Donald Trump said, I can do better, and tore it up, which has freed the Iranians. They're not bound anymore because the United States withdrew from the treaty. Well, silly us. This is a treaty which a country can say, well, I've decided to withdraw. Well, this treaty that I'm talking about can't be that way. There have to be penalties. And there also have to be security agreements for some of the countries who almost have a legitimate reason for having their nuclear weapons. Prime of those, in my mind, is Israel. Israel has not got nuclear weapons. It doesn't have very many, about 90. They don't admit it, but scientific sleuthing tells us they have about 90. Israel doesn't have them to protect itself against a nuclear armed opponent. There aren't any. Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon. It has it to protect itself against other kinds of force that might be used against Israel. So, in some sense, their super powerful force is an intimidation, a deterrent to neighboring countries that might want to attack. And we have to find another way to protect them. Some kind of international security agreement that's pretty reliable enough that Israel will be willing, under supervision and inspection and all the rest, to give up their nuclear weapons. It's going to be tough. These are going to be the toughest international negotiations that the world has ever tried to undertake. Much harder, I think, today than creating the United Nations was in 1945. But we need to do it. What will it take? It'll take political leadership, because it's the government leaders in these 9 nations that have to initiate this. That's political leadership, leadership from the top political leaders of those nations, or at least from some of them to get them started. Now, let me tell you about, the title was Pope Francis, Joe Biden, and You. Here's where Joe Biden figures in. Joe Biden, as you all know, has been a senator ever since birth. No, age 35. He was actually elected senator before he could serve, but he turned 35 by the time he was to take office. He's been a senator, he's been in the national scene all that time. Joe Biden knows more about nuclear weapons than any president we've ever had and any president that we're likely to have. He's been very actively involved. 3 years after joining the Senate, he was over in Russia negotiating with the Soviets to get them back on track in one of the then existing nuclear reduction agreements. And he's been involved in the issue ever since. As vice president, his parting speech was a major policy address, very public, very long, very available on the internet, but hardly identified by any, hardly identified in the public at all, in which he called for a whole new approach by the United States to nuclear weapons. And he had 2 sentences that I have memorized. The first was, if we want a world without nuclear weapons, the United States must take the lead. It must take the initiative to lead us there. He didn't say could or should, he said must. And then he went on to say, the second sentence, because we are the only nation to have ever used nuclear weapons, we have a great moral responsibility to lead the charge. Now that was 2017. And then he sat on the sidelines for 4 years. He's been president for the last 3, and to my consternation, as far as I can see, he hasn't done anything to fulfill those words. I don't know why. I would love to talk to him about it. But actually, what I'd love more is for Archbishop Lester and Ira Helfand to go talk to him about it. Nice private conversation. Hey, Joe, we're here to prick your conscience. It's time for you to deliver on these words. I wish I could make that happen. One of my fondest wishes, okay? I think he still has this care and concern. I don't see any sign that he hasn't, but I don't see any sign that he's doing anything about it, and it really puzzles me and disturbs me. But frankly, I'm disturbed about Pope Francis. Pope Francis has taken this very strong public position about the immorality of nuclear weapons, and why isn't he getting his church? Why isn't he telling every bishop, you need to talk to your congregations about it, you have your priests talk about it? This is the big moral issue of the times. I don't know why Pope Francis isn't doing that. All I can say is that both of these guys are very good guys in my book, have a whole lot else on the plate, and think they can only do so much. So we have to change that. That's our job, to show them that they have support from us, that they can step out and take this kind of leadership position, that they can step out and take the risk, the political risk, of being called soft on defense, weak, and all those sorts of things that happen if you are a public official who say, I think we should get rid of our nuclear weapons. So that takes public support. That's our role, is to provide good people in government with the support that they can do the right thing safely and not get thrown out of office, not get ignored, so on. So they need backing. Some of my friends in the peace movement call it, well, we have to pressure them into doing the right thing. I don't think it works to pressure people into doing the right thing. What you have to do is support them. You have to inspire them. And that's what I want us to do, is to support the more good-minded and political leaders who want to do this stuff. So how do we do that? Well, first thing, get informed. Best way, read Archbishop Wester's 53-page pastoral letter. Or really can't commit that to you more strongly. Okay, if you can't read all of it, start somewhere, and then you'll learn a lot. The U.S. has a campaign. Dr. Ira Helfand is a principal in forming this campaign called Back from the Brink. It's principally sponsored by the Physicians for Social Responsibility, the U.S. arm of the International Physicians for the Prevention of War. Back from the Brink calls for the U.S. to take the lead in securing an international agreement to eliminate nuclear weapons. It also calls for some intermediate steps. It needs support. It's been ongoing for about 3 years. A lot of cities and towns, including my own home city of Needham, have signed on to this. A bunch of us were able to persuade the town meeting of Needham to endorse the Back from the Brink program a couple of years ago. More and more cities have done it. Parishes have done it. Pax Christi chapters have done it. And of course, individuals have done it. And then many other kinds of non-religious organizations have done it as well.
The Diocese of Springfield did it.
Springfield.
The bishop actually endorsed it.
Right. So, there's also a resolution in Congress this year called House Resolution 77. Believe it or not, it's sponsored by another good Catholic. Okay. There is Catholic leadership on this. We have to support them. Representative Jim McGovern from Worcester, whom I've met and talked with and observed in Congress for many years, very, very moral man, very, very extraordinarily well-informed and intentioned, and working on multiple moral issues: food, humanitarian aid, and nuclear weapons. Congressman Jim McGovern sponsored House Resolution 77, which calls for implementing the Back from the Brink program. It also calls for embracing the goals of that international treaty that I told you that no nuclear nation has signed on to. It now has 61 co-sponsors in the House. We need another 100. Well, only 4 representatives of Massachusetts have signed on to this. So we need to get some more. Prime candidate, your congressman, Bill Keating. If you do nothing else for me and for this cause, I want you to call Congressman Keating's office tomorrow, or the latest on Monday, and just say, Congressman Keating, we want you to co-sponsor House Resolution 77. It doesn't put the nation in danger. It only calls on the United States to take the initiative to lead us to a world without nuclear weapons, to get started on the negotiations. There are 2 bills before the Massachusetts legislature. One would put Massachusetts on record in support of the Back from the Brink program. The other would establish a commission that would investigate this and publish the impact of on nuclear war and the impact of climate change. It's a dual. The 2 great humanitarian extinction threats are addressed in this one bill. Form a commission to educate us all on what would be the impacts on Massachusetts. Those 2 bills deserve your support. And then the other thing you can do is join one of these flaky peace groups. Okay? Yeah, they're flaky. Okay? Wonderful people. Okay? And one of the best things about embracing a good cause is you get to work with a lot of good people. That's been a really wonderful thing that's happened to me, because you get to work with people like the Pax Christi chapter here, like Francis Jeffries, who's here in the audience, who's ardently working to try to convert Rotary International, another global organization, like my colleagues in Massachusetts Peace Action. So join one of those groups. You'll get better informed. You'll go on their email list. They'll send you some stuff and so on. They're not going to make outrageous demands, but you just might get turned on. I want you to run the risk of getting turned on. Okay? Please, for the sake of humanity. All right. Time for discussion. Yes, sir, go right ahead.
Yes, I got a question.
Good. Just be nice and loud so everybody can hear you. Right.
We're naming all these people like congressmen and senators. When we accept Christ as our Lord, there's a standard that we live by, the Bible. Now, all these people that you named, a lot of them, they believe in abortion, they believe in same-sex, they believe everything the Bible talks against, they believe. And you expect that they're going to, if they can't stick to that, how are they ever going to go into the nuclear when they can't even handle what the Bible says? It don't make sense. Because you're Christian, the 10 Commandments are not suggestions. We're supposed to live that way, each of us. So we all imperfect, but we have a standard. And these people that you named, you read about them every day. They don't believe it. And how can they lead us through a nuclear war? If they got to face Christ, we all do. And what they're preaching, I don't want to be in their shoes. Does that make sense?
One of the things that Pope Francis teaches.
Even the Pope doesn't speak up.